Jotaro has long been a character that has generated significant debate among fans. There are people who think he was a good JoJo and others who believe he had a lot of shortcomings and that he was probably the most simple-minded JoJo, along with our father, Jonathan. If you asked me, I'd tell you that Jotaro is a character I neither love nor dislike. I think he played a good role in his part and made up for his shortcomings quite well, complementing the rest of the Crusaders. Now, without a doubt, what this character has always been most accused of is being huge, immense, infinite, universal, multiversal, omnipotent, and omniscient. Gary Stu, or in simpler terms, the guy who always gets everything right and beats everyone. BLT, wouldn't that make the character a Gary Stu? Let me explain my perspective. Shh, be quiet, you stinky. Silence. Most likely, Jotaro is a character conceived as a Gary Stu, and that's it. This part of the manga, written around 1989, featured a character type that was considered ideal for that era. So I don't even think we need to overthink it. But unfortunately, I'm a damn arrogant, stubborn guy who has to find meaning and an explanation for everything I see. Most of the time, I end up drawing my own conclusions that, generally speaking, are wrong. So this is a little theory I've put together, connecting the dots here and there. And seriously, burn the word theory into your mind. There is no conclusive evidence that what I'm about to say is real, or even makes any logical sense. This is just one of my headcanons, but it's more intriguing than most I come up with. I'm mentioning this to avoid any potential backlash. Joe said to Beals, "Well, I'm sorry, but you're wrong here." In JoJolion Volume 120, it's revealed that Jotaro is actually a scrawny squirrel with intestinal issues. I'm really sorry, but your theory is completely invalidated. Joe, be quiet. We get it. You know a lot about JoJo. Damo, don't laugh. Do you genuinely like dressing that way? I'm kidding. Let's see their channels, please, and say hi to them from me, okay? They're a couple of awesome JoJo tubers. For this theory, I've gathered several seemingly insignificant pieces of information, but when combined and given logical coherence, they form a coherent whole. You can draw a fair conclusion about why Jotaro is so overpowered in my view. First, let's look at the rest of the JoJo's from Part 1 to Part 5, mainly because I haven't read the rest, although, as far as I know, they shouldn't be a problem for this theory. In Star Wars Crusaders, Jotaro was only 17 years old, as we well know. For example, Jonathan at the start of Phantom Blood is 20 years old, while Joseph is 19 at the beginning of Battle Tendency. The characters' physical traits were nearly those of a typical human. Of course, the fact that they are extremely muscular and about 6 foot 5 inches tall. Thanks to belonging to the Joestar lineage, they had physical abilities above average, but nothing that was exaggerated. On the other hand, Jotaro, with noticeably fewer years, not even reaching adulthood, already had physical abilities that allowed him to easily match and surpass any experienced stand user who stood in his way, while his two predecessors had to undergo quite demanding training in order to reach an outstanding level. Now let's examine Josuke, who was only 16, even younger than Jotaro. The key is that in Josuke's case, it was very clear he was not yet an adult. Beyond having a great height and blah blah blah, in Jotaro's case, it never was. In fact, he always seemed physically and psychologically superior to everyone. You can't compare the neighbors of Morio with Dio's troops. Obviously, some villagers with stands couldn't match the ferocity of Dio's mercenaries. The quality of their stands doesn't matter. Josuke did defeat his part's villain, Yoshikaga Kira. I never knew how to spell his name. He wasn't a character who stood out in one-on-one fights or for his combat abilities. Quite the opposite, he was a psycho killer who relied much more on cunning and stealth to defeat his enemies. In fact, physically, he's the weakest opponent. If you ask me, probably anyone watching this video could take on Akira physically, as long as he doesn't have his stand available. Of course, I'm not going to talk about Giorno because this guy has a mix of genes in his body that honestly is a very unique case. Despite his unremarkable physical and mental combat abilities, he stood out for his stand power and ambition to achieve his dream. For some reason, Jotaro was different, as if he had been designed to be powerful, because yes, and this is strange, why would Araki make a Gary Stu in the third part? After all, the Gary Stu was more in fashion during Jonathan's era, thanks to the overwhelming and absolute success that was Hokuto no Ken in American comics. Why was Jotaro a Gary Stu? Jotaro stood out so much among all the other JoJos because the entire fate of the Joestar family rested on his shoulders. Let's go with the evidence. I'm going to give you some facts that apparently have nothing to do with each other, but when you add a third one, they make a lot of sense. Jonathan swears to Dio that he will pursue him relentlessly, even beyond death if needed. We know this wasn't just figurative, since Dio and the Joestar bloodline were bound together forever one way or another, making the Joestar bloodline a cursed one. At first, their mission was to stop Dio and prevent his destiny of ruling the world. Because yes, that was always Dio's destiny. The universe always conspired, giving him the means again and again to be able to achieve his goal. Stone Mask, an invincible stand at that time, and even in a video game, Eyes of Heaven. A ridiculously powerful mode, which I know isn't canon, but it really sets the mood. What I'm saying is irrelevant, whether it's canon or not. A destiny always thwarted by the Joestar bloodline. Secondly, we have Jotaro before his attitude change. According to what Holly, Jotaro's mother, tells us, his attitude before he changed, in quotes, was radically different. Maybe this is just something silly from Holly, and in reality, Jotaro was always a rebel without a cause. Is that possible? Jotaro's student photo reveals several details about him during that time in his life. The first is that he was physically much more modest than the monster he turned into shortly after. In a relatively brief time, a year or two max, in a way that appears more supernatural than biological to me. If we also look at his face, we'll see that his features and expression were much friendlier. A pretty gentle style, similar to Josuke's if you ask me. How is Jotaro's mutation related to the Joestar bloodline curse? It's quite simple. Dio Brando. Sooner or later, Dio would return because he always comes back. The Joestars have the mission to stop him constantly, since Dio can't be stopped for good. One way or another, he will always be present in the universe of this manga. This would explain why Joseph was pretty normal when he was young. With some ham and knowledge, yes, but Caesar's restaurant scene shows his ham and level was pretty basic. Joseph wasn't like Jotaro because Dio was prepared to return to the world much later, 2 generations later. Jonathan's entire will was inherited by Jotaro, and no, I won't make the obvious joke that Jonathan is Star Platinum, although it's true. I'm just kidding. Jotaro's immense Joestar willpower manifested when he turned 17, giving him all the qualities he would need later to be able to stop the most dangerous man in this world. An infernal and invincible being destined to dominate the world, Dio. A detail that strongly supports this theory is the legendary phrase Jotaro said to Dio during their fight. When Jotaro told Dio that it turned out they both had the same type of stand. While many viewed it as a typical Gary Stu plot twist, reminiscent of Jotaro's style, I had a different perspective. I always felt something wasn't quite right. And when I connected the dots, it all made sense. The reason why Jotaro had Star Platinum was simply because that was the only way for the Joestars to stop Dio once again. And you might say, but BLC, this doesn't make sense. If Jotaro had been the one chosen to defeat Dio, wouldn't it have made more sense to give him a stand? One that would directly counter Zawarudo and not just be similar? Yes, you might be right, but the thing is, the simplest way to beat someone without the possibility of failure is to have the same abilities as them, just better. Star Platinum seemed inferior to Zaguardo at the beginning of the fight, but as the battle went on, Star Platinum adapted to Zaguardo and became stronger. I'm not just referring to stopping time. Initially, Jotaro was no match for Dio in close combat. But by the end of the fight, Star Platinum exceeded Zawarudo's strength and toughness. In the final blow, Star Platinum suffered 1 damaged fist, while Zawarudo was utterly destroyed. It doesn't make sense that at the start of the fight, Star Platinum's abilities were inferior, a fact even Dio pointed out. The conclusion I come to is that Jotaro was given an incredibly strong personality and body, almost supernatural for his age, so that he would be able to face Dio in both body and mind, along with a stand of the same type as Dio's, which, if used well, could surpass him. This would also explain why Jotaro became noticeably weaker after Star Wars Crusaders, both in body and personality. Yes, he never stopped being serious, but he softened a lot. Could it have been due to character development? The personality part, yes, but not his power, definitely not. Don't claim he stopped training. That's absurd, as he never worked to become stronger in the first place. And I can assure you that a person at 28 years old is at their physical peak, while at 17, they're still developing. So it doesn't make sense for the adult Jotaro to be worse than the teenager, it just doesn't. Of course, unless we apply this theory. After Jotaro stopped Dio, the Joestar will faded, leaving him with the same amount as the other family members. This would explain why he declined so much in a coherent way. And that's all. I know the theory has some weak points and all that, but you already know, those of you who watched my video talking about Giorno. I like to dig deep and come up with crazy theories, even if they only make sense to me. If I forgot something or left something out, I'll make sure to put it in the pinned comment in the box down below. So, I invite you to check if I forgot something and put it down there as a comment. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to become a top-tier Yu-Gi-Oh fan. Follow me on Twitter and Discord too. Check out my gaming channel, you'll love it. We're otakus, but the kind that shower and have a social life. And I'll see you in the next videos. See you next time.